Hi, everyone. Welcome to another installment. Today, I'm here with my colleague, Erminio Caporali, and today we're going to be talking about trends in the food and beverage industry relative to private equity and due diligence. So before we get into that, why don't I turn it over to Erminio to introduce himself, and then he's going to talk a little bit about uh, his observations in the market and what we're seeing today.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, my name is Erminio Caporal, and I'm a senior director in our transaction advisory group. I have been here at A&M for over 10 years now, and I am also part of our dedicated food and beverage team. I'm based out of Chicago, and I live in the suburbs with my wife and two kids. To your point on overall activity in the food and beverage sector, what we've seen is that food and beverage activity in the first half of 24 has been pretty resilient relative to certain other sectors within consumer products. It's down a bit from the first half of 23, but overall, deal activity is still happening, and that's especially the case within the middle market. The activity that we have seen has been much more heavily weighted to strategic versus private equity. I believe the deals completed in the first half of 24 are approximately 80% strategic. But I do think that as interest rates come down in the future, private equity buyers are likely to get more involved. It feels like to me, based on what I've seen specifically at A&M, that our clients continue to stay active. And I'll note that most recently, we've seen a lot of inbound sell side activity, which could mean that there's going to be a big uptick in the second half of the year. That said, I would be curious, Anthony, to get your take on what you've seen within food and beverage, specifically at A&M, and maybe how you expect that to continue moving forward.
Sure. I think the trends that you mentioned specifically for food and beverage in the industry is pretty consistent with what we see practice-wide thus far this year. There's been a healthy level of activity, although slightly down from last year and the year before. But that said, certainly a lot of interest in the space and a good combination of both buy side and sell side activity for us specifically. I do think that going forward, much like many other industries, if there are reductions in interest rates and financing gets a little bit easier, we certainly would see an uptick, and I think we're well positioned to serve that. I'd be curious, Erminio, relative to food and beverage, what are some of the specific areas that you see interest in, and how does that differ from some of the industry-wide trends, perhaps that might be different than at A&M?
Sure. Well, you touched on it, but what's top of mind for everyone for food and beverage and more broadly has been inflation and pricing pressure. And that's been a key theme within this sector. And then one that's a bit more unique to food and beverage in some cases would be a shift towards healthier eating, healthier products, and sustainability. And I can touch on both of those in that order. From a pricing perspective, across any industry, input costs have gone up, whether that's materials, commodities, labor costs to pay people, overhead rates, things like that. And it's been important that companies can raise pricing in order to kind of react to that and maintain their margins. What we've seen within food and beverage activity here at A&M, driven by that, has been a bigger focus on private label and also contract manufacturing. And then kind of adjacent to that has been vertical integration into the supply chain. And in all cases, the big theme there is just managing your costs and being able to more closely manage those. The other thing would be that we've seen a lot of add-on or merger type acquisitions, and those are focused on one, expanding volume and diversifying your sales volume, so moving into potentially other end markets or other brands, things like that. And two, it allows you to realize synergies when combining those companies. An example of this that I'm sure a lot of people have seen in the news is in the last couple of weeks, Mars acquired Kellanova, and that has allowed Mars to expand more out of sweets and into savory. So they're expanding volume, they're expanding into a new kind of offering. And in addition to that, they're going to try and realize cost synergies between the two. So that's been a trend that we've seen. Yeah,
And
and
it's ever evolving, and certainly as consumer interests change and people are into different things, I suspect that in order to continue to be top of mind, certain legacy companies will continue to try and differentiate themselves. That said, all of those areas that you just mentioned, um, that presents a lot of different areas to perform due diligence on. So, with that backdrop, how have you seen some of food and beverage diligence evolve over the years, and specifically your time here at A&M over the last decade?
sure. I guess in the last 2 years, the most obvious thing has been extended diligence periods. Interest rates are up. There's pricing pressure for all companies, and buyers are digging in more. So we're seeing that diligence periods are extending, twice as long as they might have a couple of years ago. And on top of that, specific to food and beverage, there's been huge commodity movements. The movement of cocoa recently, I'm sure a lot of people have seen, has gone through the roof, then come back down. And as those commodities move, and it's happening each month, an extended diligence period allows buyers to see an extra month of activity. So we've seen that they just want to hang on and see, well, let's roll forward through this month and the next month to make sure that they fully understand the trend of where the company is going.
Yeah, that's both good and bad.
Yeah.
Certainly it allows for better performance, but also if certain market conditions change, uh, we've seen performance go the other way, and then obviously that leads to more extension. So I certainly see that across the practice as well, and that provides both opportunities for us, but also some challenges too to serve those opportunities. I would say maybe the last point I'd like to cover, Erminio, with you, what do you expect going forward? Clearly, there's maybe some more near-term conditions relative to interest rates, as you mentioned, an election, at least here in the U.S., but also more medium-term beyond that. What do you expect and what do you predict potentially going forward?
So in the very near term, I would expect that. So as a symptom of some of the pricing pressure that's occurred, there's been a divestment of non-core assets and certain distressed opportunities. And those have been attractive for certain of our clients. But the key is going to be properly integrating those in the very near term so that you can properly realize those synergies. I think that's going to be a key focus from a diligence perspective in the next 6 months or so. I think moving forward past that, we're likely, based on what everyone's saying at least, to be in a more deflationary environment, and interest rates are likely to come down. So I do expect that some of our private equity clients are going to be more active. And I think that trend that I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, where it's 80% strategic, 20% PE, might shift a little bit to be closer to, call it 60-40. And I think that will continue next year, and private equity interest will kind of accelerate.
A lot of what you mentioned is certainly relevant to us as a practice. I know it's relevant to many of our clients. So I appreciate your insights and your discussion points on the industry. I personally like the space. I spend a lot of time in it over the years, and I know both you and I expect some good activity to come. So I appreciate your insights here and your time, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.
Sounds great. Thank you, Anthony. Bye.